Has a teacher or an editor ever advised you not to use the passive voice? Let us explore as to why we shouldn't use the passive voice and what possible scenarios do exist where we can use the passive voice. So first, what exactly is passive voice in English? To understand that, we have to know that English is a subject, verb, and object language. That means that when we put together a sentence in English, especially a sentence that has an action or a verb in it, the subject comes first, followed by the verb, and then the object upon which the subject is performing an action. So an example would be, let's say, in active voice, if I wanted to say it, I would say, the dog ate the cake. The dog is the one performing the action. The verb is eating, and the thing being eaten, the object upon which the action is being performed, is the cake. Now, if we were to reverse this in passive voice, the object, the thing or place or person upon which an action is being performed, will come in the beginning of the sentence. So it would be said like, the cake was eaten by the dog. So in active voice, the dog ate the cake. In passive voice, the cake was eaten by the dog. Now that we have a cursory understanding of what passive voice is, why do people insist that we should not use it, especially teachers and editors? If you are in college or in high school, your English teacher might have pointed it out to you that you shouldn't use a lot of passive voice. Well, the one main reason is that when we use passive voice, we are going against the general psychological expectation of readers in English language. Since it's a subject, verb, object language, the reader expects immediately to encounter the subject of a given clause or a sentence in the very beginning. And it makes it easier for them to follow what action is being performed and upon whom or to whom. So when we put it in the passive voice, the reader has to read the whole sentence to figure out who is doing what to whom. So here is an example. If you take a look at these two constructions, the first one is passive voice, and the second one is active voice. You will see that when we write in passive voice, the sentences tend to be clumsy and longer, whereas when we write in active voice, the sentences are concise and shorter. Take a look. So the passive construction is, the books were taken by me to the store as they were not needed by me because they had all been read. Look at it as a clause. It is pretty long, right? Now the active sentence of this is pretty simple and concise. I took the books to the store, semicolon. I did not need them as I had already read them. So what's the distinction? In the passive voice example that I just read out to you, it's very hard to find out why the books need to go to the store. We have to reach until the end of the sentence or the second clause to know that, oh, the person saying this has already read the books. Whereas when we read the active sentence, it's just two clauses. The first one basically says, I took the books to the store, so we already know who took what to where. Pretty clear. And the second part after the semicolon very clearly states that, I didn't need them as I had already read them. So which sentence is clearer, right? Obviously the active sentence. So in your writing, especially if you're writing a paper or even in creative writing, if you write in active sentences, your writing tends to be less clumsy and sentences are tighter and nicer and easier to read. Even in speaking, when we speak in active voice, we are clearer and we make clear sense to anyone who is listening to us. For example, this conversation I started with a statement. Has a teacher or an editor ever told you not to write in passive voice? That was an active statement. I could have said it in passive voice. Have you ever been told by a teacher or by an editor not to write in passive voice? Now that's a passive construction. You can already see that the sentence is longer and you have to read all the way to the end or listen to it all the way to the end to make sense of it. Because part of the way we make sense of any given sentence written or spoken is our minds are trying to locate the subject, right? The agent who performs an action. We're trying to locate the verb in it, what action is being performed, and then we are trying to locate the object, right? What is it upon which or to whom something is being done or something is being given. Active sentences, the direct sentences, enable the reader or the listener to grasp that more quickly. And in your writing, it makes it possible to convey whatever you want to say clearly and concisely. Now, there are instances where it is okay and even you are advised, I used a passive sentence here, you're advised to write in passive sentences. So let's take a look at that and figure out why it is important sometimes to write in passive voice. So there are many instances in which you can use passive voice. First, you can use passive voice to emphasize the action or the recipient. So what you're trying to do is not put the emphasis in a given sentence or a statement to the person performing the action, but rather on the action itself or on the object, on someone who is receiving the action. So let's say if I wanted to emphasize something in which the recipient is more important than the person performing the action, I could say something like, the patients were not happy with the way they were treated by the doctors. Now, the reason it is permissible to use the passive voice here is because we are trying to highlight the patient's feeling who are being acted upon by the doctors. And so it would be kind of a permissible usage. Another place where we can use the passive voice is when the actor is unknown or unimportant. So, in your conversation, if you're trying to emphasize a point, you would say, a lot of things were said. We have often used this term. We are basically saying that upon a given topic, someone has said a lot of things, but we are not concerned about who said them. We are more focused on the quantity or amount of statements being made by, some people. But those people are not important. So when it is not important enough to emphasize who said what, but just the content, we can say things like a lot of things were said, a lot of things are being said. You often hear it in news or in newspaper articles that, a journalist would start a paragraph by saying a lot has been said about birth control or a lot has been said about higher education, right? So the point is they are not necessarily emphasizing who has said it, but that is a permissible use of passive voice. Another usage quite frequently of passive voice is when you want to avoid blame. And journalistic articles motivated by maybe political bias often use it. You might have seen it in the war coverage, right? Let's say the bombing of Gaza. Instead of saying Israeli Defense Forces bombed Khan Yunis, you will read a sentence like 5 die in Khan Yunis bombing. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to share the news that 5 people were killed in the bombing of a refugee camp, but we don't want to name the perpetrator for political reasons or for any other exigencies. So anytime you want to pay less attention to the person performing the action and want to kind of sanitize the impact of an action, newspapers, even TV news, use the passive voice by omitting the direct verb and the direct subject of a sentence. Most scientific writing, the language tends to be passive. Instead of saying we mixed 2 chemicals to produce a third one, basically in scientific writing you could write or you will write 2 chemicals were mixed to achieve X result, right? So it's acceptable in scientific writing. Another acceptable use of passive voice is if for variety. Like, let's say you're working on a complex paragraph and you have all the direct sentences. It's okay to sometimes use a passive sentence here and there, especially if you're trying to suggest through your writing that the person upon whom the action is being performed has no agency or no control. So if I were to say I was someone robbed me, but I wanted to convey my helplessness, I would say I was robbed by someone. Or if I was ambushed, I could say I was set upon by 2 people, right? So what it conveys then is not necessarily my state of mind, but my state of not being able to do something, or maybe my helplessness. So these are some of the plausible, permissible usages. And we can use passive voice in these circumstances. So overall, it is always better to write in active sentences, and an active sentence has the subject of the sentence first, then the verb, and then the object upon which an action is being performed. But occasionally, as I just discussed, you can also use passive voice. So I hope by now you're at least clear what does it mean when someone says do not use passive voice, and maybe this has helped you a little in understanding when to use active voice and when possibly you can use the passive voice. I hope this helps in your writing and also in your public speaking. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, please do post them. I'll be happy to answer if I know the answer to them. And as always, thank you so much for your support, and I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.